What's up, everyone? This is your friend Joseph Craven. I'm joined by Keith, Big Boss Harkins. How are you, Keith?
Very tired, but ready to talk about SEC football.
Well, you're better off than I am because I am never in my life ready to talk about SEC football.
It's fair.
We're here and another running out the clock sports preview episode. This time around, we're talking about the Missouri Tigers. We've been working through the SEC standings in like reverse order over the past couple of weeks. So we have detailed, Arkansas, Vanderbilt, Tennessee, Ole Miss, Auburn. Who am I overlooking? Who else did we cover already?
That's probably it.
Is that it?
Ole
All
Miss.
right. I mentioned Ole Miss.
Okay. Sorry. I heard every team but Ole Miss. So
Totally fair. It was Arkansas, Tennessee, Ole Miss, and Vanderbilt, and then Auburn. Yeah. Okay. Wow. I really thought we had put out another episode by now. I guess it just shows you how
we are very behind.
Yeah. Gosh, it shows you how prepared I am to talk about Missouri. Missouri has got to be the saddest situation in college football right now. And I apologies in advance to any Missouri fans that we have hanging out, listening to the podcast. But you have to be realistic about the fact that your team just went 8-5 amongst some criticism maybe, and some fans thinking that maybe Barry Odom didn't deserve to hang on to his coaching job, and then instantly got in trouble. You went 8-5 despite all of that, had this opportunity to to capitalize on that by getting the top transfer in the country, I think, in Kelly Bryant. I don't know if there were any other transfers that people were expecting more of, but I feel like he was the guy people were really thinking would be the biggest one, the highest impact. And then you instantly got put on probation.
Whoops.
And and now you're sitting here with this wasted opportunity, really, with Kelly Bryant. You're sitting here with kind of a lack of what's the word I'm looking for? A lack of momentum.
Mm.
And not to mention that, you also, it wasn't that long ago, you had football team boycott and racial protests happening on campus that have kind of...
Man, I totally forgot about that.
Yeah, exactly. That have kind of also defined recent memory with Missouri. And Keith, you look at Missouri right now, you look at a team that showed up in the SEC with a generational, talent on the defensive line and the linebacking core that allowed them to win the East, right out the gate. And since then have kind of stagnated some, struggled some. Yeah, you look at Missouri. What's your assessment of where they are right now as a program?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think it's any huge coincidence that the program kind of hit some speed bumps after what happened with Gary Pinkel and him stepping down, and kind of like you losing your identity, because Gary Pinkel, that's not a guy who just came in and made waves. He was there for a while. He was essentially the face of that program.
Oh yeah, very impactful.
Yeah,
very impactful.
And obviously quite a good coach to come into the SEC East and win it 2 years running, straight away. So, but they managed to kind of turn it around and go 7-6 and then 8-5. And like you said, we're building some momentum going back up. And then you get Brian Kelly and suddenly
Brian Kelly.
What?
You just said you get Brian Kelly.
Oh. Well,
Kelly Bryant.
Yeah, that's my full word dyslexia.
Oh, that's so
Very
funny.
very rare form of dyslexia.
Well, it's just funny because you said it, and in my mind, just there's this split second which I was like, "Wait, hold on. When did they get Brian Kelly? What did I miss?"
Surprise. Um, one of the funnier things that I've seen is how because we're in the middle of SEC media days, and
hmm
um, they were asking Kelly Bryant,
There you go.
uh, you know, if he had any second thoughts about transferring to Missouri and kind of his feelings on like the whole situation. He said, "No, I never had any second thoughts about transferring. I never thought about transferring back out." And like what's he supposed to do in that situation?
Right.
Like he's not going anywhere. If he immediately bails on the program, like at that point, like who's gonna take him and like insert him right into the lineup? It's just
I mean,
it's a
we
tough
say that, but
situation.
let's be honest. It's college football, and teams are desperate for instant success.
It's true, and he was I would say moderately successful at Clemson. So
He did all right for himself.
yeah,
Did all right for
he was
himself.
fine. So yeah, it's a weird season already for Missouri, and we haven't even had the opening kickoff yet.
Yeah, and that's the biggest, I guess, thing that you have to deal with when you look at Missouri, is that what do you hope to do this season? You
Mm-hmm.
know,
Mm-hmm.
what do you hope to do? I mean, I don't think they're going to be. I think some of I could be wrong on this. I think some of the sanctions that set on them include, they wouldn't be eligible at all for anything if they were to win the SEC East. They wouldn't be eligible for it unless the appeal that they're trying to go. I think they're appealing right now. Unless that were to succeed, they wouldn't be eligible for it. So you've got this looming cloud overhead of, okay, this could be the year in which, like, after last year when maybe we started off slow, we struggled and all that. What, 4 straight conference losses last year between Georgia, South Carolina, Bama, Kentucky, before they, sorry to point it out, but pulled it out against your Florida Gators.
It was less pulling it out and more of just bashing it over their heads.
But you had this 0-4 start to the conference play in the season that you had to deal with. That made it look like, oh, maybe we need to scrap everything, get out of here, start rebuilding, get a different coach, so on and so forth. You have the opportunity to say, all right, look, Drew Lock is gone now. We got the grad transfer in Kelly Bryant, who's going to be able to come in, instantly contribute with basically every key offensive player other than Drew Lock coming back for the Missouri Tigers. And then all of this happens where it's like, well, maybe we aren't going to have anything to play for at all. I mean, what motivation do you have in this situation? What do you do with this sort of season? Do you just give it your best shot and hope that you're going to have something else to play for when the season's done? You know what I mean? Like, what do you do?
Yeah. What's interesting to me is that this is very different for different players. Like most of the team is going to be very, I would say, motivated to kind of finish out like their senior years on a high note, finish up their playing careers on a high note to say, look, like it doesn't matter what happens with the NCAA, we are a good team and we proved it on the field. But with Kelly, like, this isn't his team. Like, this isn't his school. Like, he was a Clemson Tiger for his whole career, and now he's coming into Missouri with potentially a fruitless season ahead of him.
Yeah.
outside of maybe making his case for a first or second round draft pick, but which is motivation in itself. But you know, while there's just a lot of different motivational factors here, and I don't think it's going to be the same for everybody.
I mean, you got to think that these guys are having to focus on, especially for Bryant, proving after being benched for a true freshman last year, proving he's still the guy, proving that he can still do what he needs to do to, run a successful program as a quarterback, proving that he has what it takes to be a pro as well, right? And maybe that's motivation enough, but it's got to be real hard to really get motivated in general. I'm looking at a report right now, and I believe looking at a report that, ESPN put this up just on July 15th. So this is the most recent update that we can get, I guess, that Missouri has to appear before the committee, the sanctions committee, this week. And then they'll get an answer as to whether or not that sanction will be lifted, overturned, whatever it may be. So their appeal will have a final answer pretty soon. But as of now, they're still hanging out in lingo. So I guess the question is, let's just say that maybe the appeal is overturned. All right. And for the sake of argument, it makes it a little bit easier to talk about Missouri a bit when they actually have something to play for.
Right.
You're looking at a Missouri team that did go 8-5 last year and did go 7-6 before then, and has actually gained a little bit of momentum under Barry Odom in his second and third seasons, winning seasons, making it to bowls. They lost 2 bowls. And they never seem under Odom to start off the season well. They pick it up in late October and November. They haven't lost a game in November in 2 seasons. Let that sink in for a second. They're the anti-Kentucky as far as winning trends go, right?
Right. So between the two of them, you have a good team.
Oh my gosh, you'd have the best team in the country if you could combine Missouri's end with Kentucky's start. It's like 2017, Missouri lost 5 straight. South Carolina, they beat Missouri State to open the season, whatever. But then South Carolina, Purdue, Auburn, Kentucky, Georgia all beat them. They get October 21st a victory against Idaho, and then a non-conference win against Connecticut. And after that, they beat Florida, they beat Tennessee, they beat Vandy, they beat Arkansas to end the SEC slate, and then they lose to Texas in a bowl game. Almost the exact same thing happens the next year. The only difference is that they had that one loss to Kentucky in late October. Otherwise, they had a win against Memphis, then the wins against Florida, Vandy, Tennessee, and Arkansas again. So, I mean, what's it going to take, you think, for Missouri to actually let's say Missouri starts off pretty well this season, and you look at the talent they bring back, Missouri in the SEC East, do you think they have something? Do you think they can contend with some of the returning big name programs such as Georgia and Florida, who are both expected, I believe, to be the top of the East?
Yeah, I don't know if they'll be able to contend directly with those two teams. I think that they're going to take a major step forward. Like, remember last year, their starting 2 wide receivers were injured like most of the year.
Emmanuel Hall and
the guy's name.
Well, I know that they had they were having a breakout season from their tight end, Albert Ogwuegbunam.
Yeah, like they had to rely on him a lot, and they had to kind of find out what sort of depth they had at the wide receiver position, and they still had, by most teams' measures and standards, a pretty good season. It also helps that their schedule this year is going to be a little easier, and that they swap out Ole Miss and Bama. Like, if they don't play Bama this year, they have to
Yeah,
play
that's true.
Ole Miss. So, not a knock against Ole Miss or anything, but they aren't as competitive as Bama is going to be.
Yeah, it's not an insult, but there's about 150 something teams in the country, I feel like, who would rather play Ole Miss than Alabama.
Oh yeah, yes, like 100%. They start the season at Wyoming, which is weird.
Yes.
And then they have West Virginia at home. And I know West Virginia was really good last year, but like Will Greer's gone. They got a couple of starters on offense gone as well. Like that's going to be a pretty different team.
Yeah.
And a winnable game. And they have Southeast Missouri, South Carolina,
the big time local rivals of Southeast Missouri.
Yeah. Gotta love those primetime matchups with directional schools.
Yeah.
But then they got like South Carolina at home, they got Troy at home, they got Ole Miss at home. And like, say what you want to about South Carolina, they are never the team you think they're going to be. I know, like last year, we were all kind of high on them, and then they pooped the bed a little bit. Granted, Kentucky was a lot better than literally anybody thought they would be. So
yes.
So I mean, really, like, it doesn't really get really tough for them until the end of October.
Right, which is when they start to shine normally.
Right. So that'll be really interesting. They got on October 26th, they are at Kentucky, who, will probably not be quite as good as last year, considering a lot of what kept them in games last year was their defense. They lost like their two best players on defense. So,
most of their core there is gone. And
and then they go to Georgia, and that's an automatic, I'm sure. And they get Florida at home.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yep. It's time to go back to Atlanta, boys. And they got Florida at home, Tennessee at home, and they finish up with Arkansas on the road. So I don't really know what they're being predicted to win in terms of like overall games, but I can see them definitely taking a step forward from 8-5 this year.
Really?
Yep, I think so. What's going to be really interesting though is, and like Chandler's kind of talked about this a little bit, he's not really high on Kelly Bryant as a passing quarterback.
Sure.
And
that's also, I think Chandler would admit that it just is always more interested in passing quarterbacks than run first quarterbacks as a whole.
Mm-hmm.
He's got a particular style of quarterback he likes, and I respect it.
Right. Yeah. For sure. And it's hard to follow up a guy like Drew Lock who had the career that like he had, but like, Kelly Bryant was also very good at Clemson. Like he got him into the playoffs.
Yeah.
So like, he's not a bad quarterback. He can certainly run the ball very well. And of course, like we all know that like running quarterbacks kind of open up plays with their arms. And so he is beyond serviceable as a passer and adds that extra element as a runner. So, is he going to be Drew Lock? Nope. But I think he's going to be good enough to get them 8 or 9 wins for sure.
Yeah, and I think the thing with him is that the big question comes down to whether he's going to try to rely on what he does best in order to win games, or what if he's going to try to rely on proving that he has an NFL caliber arm.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's a pretty significant thing because he's in a situation, and a lot of that's going to depend on the situation that the team finds themselves in.
Mm-hmm.
Like if they don't have anything to play for at the end of the season, then maybe he tries to focus on, improving his draft stock and proving that he can play in the pros. Maybe he decides that like what the last couple of number one picks in the NFL have done in terms of just being great playmakers and not true, passing quarterbacks. Maybe that's good enough. So he sticks with what he's good at in order to win games. I don't know. so much is going to depend on what the season actually means for Missouri, and I think in terms of what Kelly Bryant can focus on in terms of his impact on the field. And maybe that's I don't know, maybe that sounds like a bit of a cop-out answer when it comes
yeah, sure, yeah,
talking about him, but I do think that's really significant. I mean, from what everything looks like, Missouri's going to return a whole lot of offensive talent. I mean, Akwe Bunum will be back. Jonathan Johnson, a senior rising senior who has over 120 career catches. They get a grad transfer wide receiver from Arkansas. Actually, Arkansas's leading receiver from last year, or no, not last year, 2 years ago. So they get a veteran there. And then, of course, they've got Larry Roundtree, their running back, who had
over very quietly ran for 1,200 rushing yards.
Exactly, So
it's pretty good.
Yards. Yeah. It's not bad, not bad. So they've returned so much offensive talent. Obviously, though, always how it is in the sport. I mean, so much relies on what the quarterback does, and I think that if Kelly Bryant, depending on what it seems like Kelly Bryant has to focus on, that's going to be maybe the most important thing for Missouri this entire season, because it's difficult to replace a guy like Drew Lock.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. But I mean, we not even just us, but like I know some national people had him as kind of a dark horse Heisman candidate. Mostly because like he just had a tremendous 2017 season. Like,
yeah,
I think he threw for over 4,000 yards. It was just really, really, really good. And so like him coming in behind him, Drew Lock is going to be a little bit different. And like I said, I think he's far more than a serviceable passer. So there's going to be a drop in quality there, but I don't think it'll be enormous,
Right. I mean, he is he's a winner. He just is. Mm-hmm. He's a guy that I'm pulling up his stats right now, just kind of in general. When he did have the reins for Clemson for all 14 games, in that 2017 season, I mean, he threw for almost 3,000 yards. So not a bad number, right? Mm-hmm. Completed on his career, he's a 66% passer. He,
pretty good.
Yeah, it's not bad. It's not bad. I know the production wasn't where people wanted it to be the first few games of the season last year. And then, of course, it just, as it turns out, Trevor Lawrence was just a perfect fit for what Dabo Swinney wanted to do with that offense.
Right.
So, it makes perfect sense as to why they would have gone ahead and made the switch when, you look at what Lawrence was able to do with that team, obviously. But, Bryant maybe not going to light it up, only about 3,300 passing yards on his career so far. But that's a 66% passer who's now getting a large amount of offensive weapons to work around. And from what all the reports are that I've been reading, a decent offensive line,
Yeah, they keep bringing up the word massive and burly. So like, I think that they're just going to be a giant meat shield for him, which is always appreciated.
Yep, exactly. Exactly. So, I mean, as long as they don't let, motivation get in the way, I really think this could be a really solid Missouri offense for sure. We do have to flip to the other side of the field, of course, then, and look at the Missouri defense, because as we mentioned earlier in the episode, Missouri's defense was the reason they made it to back-to-back SEC championship games as soon as they showed up in the conference. They had, like I said, generational talent on the defensive ends, in particular, defensive line, great passers, all that sort of stuff. We're not a good pass rush last season,
Mhm.
we're actually more of a control defense as far as the statistics go, especially in the in rush defense, in great linebackers who are able to lock things down. So maybe not a big play defense anymore, like they used to be with that electric pass rush. But I
Mhm.
mean, they return a lot of production on what was a, um, decent enough defense right there. I mean, what, 4 or 5 different secondary players all return. A handful of linebackers return. The defensive line still has a lot of its like interior linemen, all that sort of stuff. Can a defense, though, Keith, lead a team to victory in the SEC when they are a control, I guess a kind of preventative defense and not a big play defense, like some of the defenses we've seen, some of the big time defenses we've seen in the past couple of years at Mississippi State, Auburn, Florida, as far as pass rush goes. Do you think Missouri's defense can be good enough to help the team succeed if they're not that productive in that area?
Yeah, I mean, it'll be a little more interesting this year because the SEC's kind of quarterback stable is to the point now to where, like, these like rising freshmen and sophomores are now juniors and seniors, and so I think you'll see the SEC kind of lean more towards passing, and so that'll make a difference, I think, with this team. But the secondary was pretty good, especially given the fact that their pass rush was so terrible and quarterbacks had, literally like as much time as they could possibly want to throw the ball. They were
It's like
31st.
a bye week for quarterbacks.
Mm-hmm.
They could just sit back there and
It's
just kind of
basically
run.
like a 7-on-7 drill.
Yeah, exactly. That's what it was.
But like they were 31st in the country last year in completion percentage at 55.7% completion rating, which again is pretty good considering they're basically running 7-on-7.
Right.
So they've got a lot of guys coming back on defense, so they're a year older, a year better. I think that a defense that's built around limiting first downs can definitely be successful and kind of like keep other teams' offenses off the field, keep the ball in your offense's hands, and you've got a better chance at winning. It's just science, Like, I know that was a very John Madden thing to say, but it's
Hey, John
it's
Madden
true.
was a legend, man, and the highest winning percentage in all NFL coaches. So I take it as a compliment that you made a John Madden statement.
Yeah. So and I don't know if you'll really agree with this, but like I've always considered Bama's defense to not really be like a high event defense. They've just been a defense that gets to the ball quickly and just smothers it. Like you can't breathe against them. Like they haven't been a team that's like led the conference in like interceptions or like fumble recoveries, like whatever. They've just been big, strong, fast dudes that limit you to 2 or 3 yards of play. And so like I'm not saying that this year's Missouri's defense is going to be anywhere close to Alabama's,
Sure.
but you can win games doing that.
You can. I mean, I think the major difference there is that, compare it to Missouri of a few years back when they had some of their. I'm drawing a blank on literally every good defensive end they had like 3 or 4 years ago, and I feel really embarrassed by it now. But
yeah, but they had like 3 or 4 years running of like elite pass rushers.
like SEC defensive players of the year type candidates.
Yeah.
But they had that years ago, and Alabama always has like a Minka Fitzpatrick in the secondary, um, the friggin' massive defensive end from last year who went in the NFL draft. Why am I drawing a blank on his name?
Who's that?
Oh, let me just find it.
From where? I don't think I heard what school you were talking about.
It's talking about Bama. There we go.
Oh.
All right. Bama had, Quinnen Williams.
Yeah, Quinn Williams.
Number 3 pick in the draft. They always will have like maybe the one super dynamic player. And maybe, yes, they are, because, Alabama, it's no surprise. Alabama builds success the way that college football has basically always had success. You control the line of scrimmage. Offensive line is always stout. Defensive line is always stout. And maybe as a whole, their defense is not going to be, like you were saying, a massive big play defense, but they always seem to have at least one major playmaker who stands out. Quinnen Williams, Minka Fitzpatrick, Reggie Ragland, all in recent years were guys that you looked at and you were like, okay, yeah, maybe they aren't like as destructive as an Auburn defensive line, as destructive as the Mississippi State pass rush, as destructive as Jabari Zuniga at Florida, that sort of stuff. You still, though, have a few of those guys, and it just seems like maybe Missouri lacks that last year and returning this year.
For sure.
I feel like they probably need that in order to actually have a defense that makes a bigger impact. Just one guy who actually is more of like a playmaker right there. There's a few guys that I've reading some, publications saying could be the guys to step up there. There is Jordan Elliott is an interior lineman that they're thinking. I think he's a transfer from Texas, and I think some people are thinking he could be a guy who really steps up there. They have, as I mentioned earlier, a lot of players in the secondary that come back, which is huge because, as you mentioned, this was a secondary that actually had a decent completion rate allowed without having a pass rush to back them up at all. So if they get any sort of production at all on that line, that could be, extremely helpful, but they're going to have something there.
Yeah, that was one of the things that really stood out in the Florida game was just how well their cornerbacks broke on passes. Like they were highly alert, very reactive, and so that was a point of frustration on like my end, just because Florida couldn't get really anything going against them on the pass, and so it kind of made them one dimensional. So like they have some athletes back there for sure. It would really help them if they had a pass rush to maybe force some errors and then kind of become that high event defense that we're so used to them being.
Yeah, exactly. Or that we maybe got spoiled seeing them being, and maybe this is really who Missouri is, a 7, maybe 8 win team who will struggle to pull out 3-4 wins in conference every year and probably drop it off a little bit there. So, all right, let's talk a little bit. You had mentioned their schedule earlier. Let's round out this little preview by looking at their schedule and kind of seeing what that looks like, because as you mentioned, it seems like a more favorable schedule in a lot of ways than it has been in the past few years, which is a welcome relief, because the last 2 previews I recorded for ROTC were Auburn and Vanderbilt, and those 2 teams have brutal schedules. Good Lord.
Yeah, it's not good.
So it's fun. Missouri, as you mentioned, has Wyoming, should not be a difficult opponent. West Virginia has a lot of question marks on what they have to replace this year compared to last year, where yeah, they were pretty good, but they still were only an 8-win team that people expected to do a lot better than they actually did. And they lost their star quarterback as well.
Right.
South Carolina probably going to be a weaker team than they were. Ole Miss, as you mentioned, is a welcome replacement for Alabama. You do have Vanderbilt. You do have to go to Kentucky. Who knows what Kentucky will look like, but you have to go to there to prestigious Kroger Field. That's what it
called it in the as I called it in the Tennessee preview. It's basically if a stadium was a jail cell. It's just concrete and sadness.
Yeah, and not in a good way. Like, oh, you don't want to go there. It's like prison. No, you don't want to go there. It's yeah, they do hold that 2-year winning streak against Florida. They didn't win against Florida 3 years ago, did they?
No, because
they didn't win against.
They were like an 11-win team 3 years ago.
Yeah, they didn't win against.
Oddly enough.
3 years ago. Yeah, they lost to Florida back then. So anyway, they got 2 wins over Florida, and Florida has to travel out to Missouri, a moderate distance away, playing out there in the SEC East.
Classic Missouri. SEC's rivalry game.
Still the dumbest thing I've ever seen.
You got to go from Gainesville to flyover country.
Exactly. So and then Tennessee and Arkansas to end it. So the past couple of years, Missouri, of course, has done well in that stretch of the last final games that they have on the season. This year, though, they have Georgia in November to break up their recent winning streak at the end of the year. So you look at this schedule, and how many games you think Missouri can actually pull out here?
I think you can count on them to win 8 at the very least, and maybe pull an upset or 2 here.
Yeah, I'm looking at it, and
I mean, there's
I could see 8 wins here, and not consider any of them to actually be upsets.
Right? Yeah, like there's a very good chance that they could go into the Kentucky game at 7-0. I mean, it wouldn't be all that surprising given who they're playing.
Yeah. Big question marks as to what is actually going on with West Virginia.
Mm-hmm.
Big question marks about South Carolina. And then, big question marks about whether, Ole Miss is on the right track now that they've kind of gotten everything off their backs. But, yeah, I mean, I think you're right. That is, by all accounts, it looks like a winnable 7 games to start things off.
Yeah, and like those games that you mentioned are all at home.
Yeah, exactly. So
I don't. A heck of a schedule to start the year. You got what, 5 home games in a row? That's somewhat messed up.
They have to start at Wyoming, so I think that's like their payment. Like because they go all the way out to Wyoming of all places to start the season, everyone feels bad and is going to let them have 5 home games in a row.
You have to start the season in Canada, but we'll give you 5 games at home.
You're playing against a CFL team. But I mean, yeah, even if you say, okay, that's a loss to West Virginia and like a loss to South Carolina, you're still looking at, Wyoming, Southeast Missouri State, Troy, Ole Miss, Vanderbilt, Tennessee, and Arkansas. That's still 7 games right there that you would have to think Missouri would not necessarily be an underdog in, right?
Right. Yeah, for sure.
When I look at this Missouri team, top to bottom, I don't necessarily see the talent there to pull off any upsets. I think that's the issue here, and that's why I think like you could be looking at 7-8 wins for sure, but I don't know if they're going to have what it takes to pull off enough upsets to get to 8-9 type of wins. Challenge it all. Yeah,
and man, so much of this just relies on Kelly Bryant coming in and like really kind of hitting the ground running because they're at Wyoming, but then they have like West Virginia, who is still going to be a pretty good team, but like if he struggles early and kind of cost him games, then I could also see them just kind of shutting themselves off and kind of going out with a whimper to end the season.
Yeah, exactly. It's a much more agreeable start to the year than they've had in a while.
Mm-hmm.
But at the same time, gosh, I mean, it's not like they were handed the worst. I mean, I guess they kind of were last year. They started off conference play Georgia at South Carolina at Alabama. That's pretty bad.
So, somebody's throwing them a massive bone here.
Yeah, exactly. That's not going to go too well for you. But I mean, you go back to 2017 where they really started off poorly. It was losses to South Carolina at home, losses to Purdue at home, losses to a not very great Kentucky team, that sort of stuff. So they have to take advantage of that. They just have to. So
yeah, for sure.
All right. I think that's going to wrap things up on this episode here. Best case scenario, and so much, of course, depends on what the NCAA ruling actually ends up in like the next week or so on that appeal. I don't foresee the NCAA respecting the appeal because that doesn't sound like something the NCAA would do.
Mm-hmm.
I do despise the NCAA. Everyone does. So that being said, let's just say that they don't do it and they don't have, a postseason to play for. Does this still, to you, look like a team that could be a dark horse in the SEC East?
I absolutely think, yeah. I see their ceiling being 10 wins, but that's still, really competitive in the East because, Georgia may not lose a whole lot, but like there's still a chance that Florida kind of struggles to find their feet and the Kentucky kind of slips a little bit. There's room to move up for sure in the East.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. The issue here is that there's a lot of question marks about whether they'll have anything to play for, whether Kelly Bryant will be able to step in and lead them the way that they want him to, and whether that defense has enough playmaking ability to help them win games. And I think when you have that many pretty big time question marks, it lends itself to some issues there. But that being said, I mean, I still think this could easily be a 7-8 win team.
For sure.
Even with nothing in the postseason to play for, they still easily could get there. So, All right, Keith, thank you for struggling through a difficult Missouri preview with me.
This is the team that is just kind of there because they're not a classic SEC team and they're not terrible enough to laugh about and make fun of, and they're not really good enough to be impressed with. So it's just kind of oh, here they are.
Here they are. Exactly. They're
going to play football this year. We know that for sure.
Yeah, and whether or not it counts, that's the question. All right. Apologies to everyone in Missouri who's listening. Obviously, we do have a lot of respect for the offensive talent of your team. And we're all sitting around hoping and praying that it means something this season.
Because, in the SEC, it just means more.
Oh, good God. I'm just kidding.
Even when there's not a record to prove it.
I'm going to mute you. You're muted now. Sorry, Keith. You're done here. Oh, man. All right.
The mute has returned.
It's returned. It's back. I've grown drunk with power. All right. I'm your friend Joseph Craven. That is Keith Harkins. This has been Running Out the Clock's 2019 Missouri Tiger preview. Keith, sign us out.
See you guys next week, probably.
Who are we supposed to talk about next week? You know what? Doesn't matter. We'll figure it out when we get there.